Little girl returns from death, describes heaven, but God's terrifying warning leaves everyone speechless. The emergency room doors burst open as paramedics rushed in with a small body on the stretcher. 9-year-old female, vehicle impact, no pulse for 15 minutes, blood stained the white sheets as doctor. Michael Anderson frantically worked over Sarah Miller's lifeless form. In the corridor, Emily Miller's prayers echoed through the sterile halls, her trembling hands clutching her daughter's worn silver cross. 20 minutes passed. Time of death was about to be called when Sarah's eyes suddenly opened, radiating an otherworldly light. Her whisper silenced the room. "I've seen God, and He has a warning for us all." Take a moment to share your location in the comments before watching this extraordinary journey of faith and miracles. Your like means the world to us and helps spread this powerful message. Sarah Miller lived with her mother Emily in a modest apartment above Henderson's bookstore in downtown Portland, where Emily worked 6 days a week to make ends meet. At 9 years old, Sarah possessed a peculiar maturity that came from watching her mother's daily struggles since her father's mysterious passing 3 years ago. Robert Miller, a former state auditor, had died in what was officially ruled a car accident, though Emily had always harbored private doubts about the circumstances. Sarah inherited her father's piercing blue eyes and her mother's unshakable faith. Every Sunday she sat in the third pew of St. Michael's Church beside Emily, her small hand wrapped tightly around her mother's, sharing a worn hymnal that had belonged to her father. The congregation often whispered about how the Millers never missed a service, even during the hardest times when Emily worked double shifts at the bookstore and picked up evening cleaning jobs at local offices. Their tiny apartment told the story of their life walls adorned with Sarah's artwork, mostly drawings of angels and heaven, as she imagined it, inspired by her mother's bedtime Bible stories. A single photograph of Robert Miller sat on their small dining table, his gentle smile watching over their modest meals. Emily had sold most of their possessions after Robert's death to pay medical bills, but she'd kept his silver cross, which Sarah now wore daily as a reminder of both her earthly and heavenly fathers. Despite their circumstances, Emily maintained an unwavering dedication to her daughter's education. She would spend evenings helping Sarah with homework, often teaching her advanced mathematics and literature far beyond her grade level. Sarah showed remarkable intelligence, particularly in subjects that explored life's bigger questions. Her third-grade teacher, Mrs. Thompson, often remarked how Sarah would pose philosophical questions that left even adults pondering. Their neighbors knew the Millers as the quiet family who always helped others despite their own hardships. Emily would share their limited groceries with elderly Mrs. Patterson next door, while Sarah would read to the younger children in the building when their parents worked late. Their small acts of kindness created a network of support that proved invaluable during their darkest hours. The absence of Robert weighed heavily on both mother and daughter, manifesting in different ways. Emily would sometimes pause while folding laundry, lost in memories of her husband, while Sarah developed a habit of writing letters to her father, storing them in a shoebox under her bed. These letters revealed a child grappling with big questions about life, death, and faith, questions that would soon take on new meaning. Their most treasured ritual was their nightly prayers. Emily would sit on the edge of Sarah's small bed, and together they would thank God for their blessings, no matter how small. Sarah always ended with a special prayer for her father in heaven, believing somehow he could hear her. These moments of faith and connection sustained them through their financial struggles and the whispered judgments of those who viewed single mothers with suspicious eyes. Little did anyone know that Sarah's deep spiritual connection and her father's unsolved death would soon intertwine in ways that would shake their community to its core. Her upcoming near-death experience would not only challenge the boundaries between heaven and earth, but would also unravel a web of corruption that had claimed her father's life and threatened to silence the truth he died protecting. Dr. Michael Anderson stood out among the veteran staff at Portland General Hospital, not just for his boyish looks at 32, but for his unwavering idealism in a system increasingly driven by profit. Despite graduating top of his class from Johns Hopkins, he chose this public hospital over lucrative private practices, believing healthcare was a right, not a privilege. His colleagues admired his skill but warned that his tendency to challenge hospital policies would eventually cost him his career. James Thompson, the only son of Senator William Thompson, carried his family name like a shield. At 28, his Harvard Law degree and political connections had already secured him a position at the city's most prestigious law firm. But beneath his polished exterior lurked a man haunted by his father's expectations and his own moral compromises. His drinking problem, carefully concealed from public view, would soon trigger events that would shatter multiple lives. Father David Parker had served St. Michael's Church for over 4 decades, his gentle wisdom earning him the trust of generations. At 73, his silver hair and warm brown eyes reflected years of witnessing both humanity's struggles and triumphs. He had known Robert Miller well, sharing private conversations that now weighed heavily on his conscience. The priest had recognized signs of distress in Robert's final confession but had been bound by sacred confidentiality. Jessica White represented a dying breed of investigative journalists at the Portland Tribune. Her desk, cluttered with exposed corruption cases, testified to 15 years of relentless pursuit of truth. At 41, she had sacrificed a personal life for her career, driven by an unshakable belief that journalism could still change the world. She had briefly investigated Robert Miller's death 3 years ago, sensing inconsistencies, but had hit walls at every turn. The hospital administrator, Victoria Reynolds, embodied institutional pragmatism. Her 20-year career built on making tough decisions had earned her both respect and resentment. She understood the hospital's financial constraints, but sometimes questioned whether she had compromised too much of her original passion for healthcare in the process. Detective Mark Sullivan from Portland Police Department's Anti-Corruption Unit had spent years building cases against powerful figures, only to watch them crumble under political pressure. His investigation of Robert Miller's accident had left him with nagging doubts but insufficient evidence to pursue further. Now approaching retirement, he kept a file of unsolved cases, waiting for that one piece of evidence that could break them open. These individuals moved in their separate orbits around Portland, unaware that their lives would soon become inextricably linked through Sarah Miller's extraordinary experience. Their choices past and future would form a complex web of redemption, justice, and divine intervention that would challenge their deepest beliefs and force them to confront their own moral compromises. Their interconnected destinies would prove that no secret remains buried forever, and that even the most hardened hearts can be transformed by a child's pure faith. As Sarah's story would reveal, each of them carried pieces of a larger truth, one that would demand courage to embrace and sacrifice to reveal. The morning that changed everything began like any other autumn day in Portland. Sarah Miller skipped ahead of her mother on their weekly trip to the grocery store, her worn silver cross catching the early sunlight. The leaves danced around her feet as she hummed her favorite hymn, unaware that fate was about to intervene in the most dramatic way possible. The black SUV appeared out of nowhere, swerving erratically across Washington Street. James Thompson, struggling to focus through his hangover, had driven straight from an all-night political fundraiser. His bloodshot eyes barely registered the traffic light turning red. Later, witnesses would describe how Emily Miller screamed her daughter's name, launching herself towards Sarah with superhuman speed. The sound of screeching tires echoed through the morning air. At Portland General Hospital, Dr. Michael Anderson was finishing his 20-hour shift when the emergency alert sounded. The trauma team assembled quickly, but Victoria Reynolds, the hospital administrator, intercepted them with a stern warning. Insurance verification first, she insisted, holding up the admission papers. "We're already over our charity care quota this month." Dr. Anderson's protest died in his throat as the paramedics burst through the doors. 9-year-old female, severe trauma. "No insurance documentation found," the lead paramedic shouted. Emily Miller ran alongside the stretcher, her clothes stained with her daughter's blood, desperately explaining that their insurance had lapsed the previous week. Victoria Reynolds stood firm, citing hospital policy, while precious minutes ticked by. Dr. Anderson looked at Sarah's lifeless form and made a decision that would alter his career forever. To hell with policy, he declared, pushing past Reynolds. This is a child. He began emergency procedures immediately, knowing he was violating direct orders. The trauma team, inspired by his defiance, jumped into action. Outside the trauma room, Emily Miller collapsed into Father David Parker's arms. The elderly priest had rushed to the hospital upon hearing the news, arriving just as James Thompson stumbled in, his expensive suit disheveled and reeking of alcohol. The young lawyer's face had drained of color as he recognized the silver cross around Sarah's neck identical to the one he'd seen in photographs of Robert Miller's accident scene 3 years ago. Jessica White, who happened to be at the hospital researching a story on healthcare inequality, watched the scene unfold with growing interest. Her reporter's instinct tingled as she observed James Thompson's peculiar reaction and the hospital administrator's unusually rigid stance on policy. She began taking notes, unaware that she was documenting the beginning of a story that would shake Portland's power structure to its core. Detective Mark Sullivan received the accident report at his desk, his coffee growing cold as he read the details. The similarities to Robert Miller's case were too striking to ignore. Same model SUV, same intersection, same time of day. He reached for the old case file, a nagging suspicion growing in his mind. In the trauma room, Dr. Anderson fought desperately for Sarah's life as the monitors screamed their warning. The girl's heart had stopped, and with each passing minute, the chances of revival diminished. Outside, Emily Miller's prayers echoed through the sterile corridors, mixing with the hushed whispers of gathering hospital staff who watched the drama unfold. Victoria Reynolds stood at her office window, phone in hand, torn between protocol and compassion. The name Miller had triggered something in her memory, a 3-year-old memo about special handling of certain cases. She reached for her files, unaware that her next decision would set in motion a chain of events that would expose long-buried secrets. For 20 excruciating minutes, Sarah Miller's lifeless body lay on the trauma room table while Dr. Anderson refused to give up. Every attempt at resuscitation failed, each electric shock sent through her small frame yielding nothing but the same flat line on the monitor. The medical team's initial urgency had given way to grim resignation, their movements becoming slower, their voices hushed. The room felt heavy with the weight of impending loss. Outside in the chapel, Emily Miller's prayers had transformed from desperate pleas to raw, primal communications with God. Father Parker knelt beside her, his own prayers joining hers in a quiet symphony of faith. The elderly priest couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was somehow connected to the troubled confession Robert Miller had shared with him 3 years ago, words that had haunted him ever since. James Thompson sat alone in the hospital corridor, his hands shaking as he attempted to reach his father. Senator Thompson's secretary kept insisting he was in meetings, but James knew the truth: his father was already orchestrating damage control. The young lawyer's mind raced through fragments of memories, his father's stern warnings about family loyalty, the night of Robert Miller's accident, and now this horrifying repetition of history. Dr. Anderson's arms ached from performing CPR, but he persisted beyond all medical protocol. "Come on, Sarah," he whispered, remembering how she had smiled at him during a chance encounter at St. Michael's Church last Sunday. Something about her eyes had reminded him of why he'd become a doctor in the first place. Victoria Reynolds had entered the trauma room twice to stop him, but the look in his eyes had silenced her both times. The monitors continued their mournful drone as Sarah's body temperature dropped. Nurses exchanged knowing looks. They had seen death enough times to recognize its presence. Yet there was something different about this case, something that made them hesitate to call time of death. Perhaps it was the mother's unwavering prayers that seemed to seep through the hospital walls, or perhaps it was the unusual confluence of circumstances that had brought them to this moment. Jessica White had managed to position herself near the trauma room, her reporter's notebook filling with observations. She noted how the usually composed Victoria Reynolds kept checking her phone with trembling hands, how Detective Sullivan had arrived and was studying the scene with unusual intensity, and how James Thompson's distress seemed disproportionate for a mere witness to an accident. In the chapel, Emily's prayers suddenly changed. Those present would later describe it as a moment of extraordinary transformation. Her desperate pleas gave way to a calm, almost peaceful declaration of faith. "Robert," she whispered, "watch over our little girl." The silver cross around her neck, the match to Sarah's, seemed to catch an impossible glimmer of light in the dim chapel. At exactly the 20-minute mark, as Dr. Anderson prepared to finally concede defeat, something extraordinary happened. The temperature in the trauma room dropped dramatically, causing the medical instruments to fog up. Several nurses later reported seeing a brief, inexplicable light that seemed to envelop Sarah's body. The flat line on the heart monitor suddenly jumped. Sarah's eyes opened, but they weren't the eyes of a frightened child awakening to trauma and pain. Instead, they held a depth and knowing that stopped everyone in the room. Her first words, spoken with unsettling clarity, silenced even the beeping monitors. "Daddy says the truth can't stay buried forever." The medical team stood frozen, witnessing something that defied their years of training and experience. Sarah's vital signs had not only stabilized but showed no indication of the trauma her body had endured. Dr. Anderson checked and rechecked the readings, unable to reconcile what he was seeing with medical science. Watching this extraordinary story unfold, your support matters. Take a moment to hit that like button and join our community in witnessing this remarkable tale of faith, miracles, and divine justice. Each like helps reach those who need this message most. Word traveled quickly through Portland General Hospital about the miracle in trauma. One Sarah Miller sat upright in her hospital bed, showing no signs of the catastrophic injuries that had, moments before, claimed her life for 20 minutes. The medical staff who witnessed her revival moved through the corridors in a daze, their scientific training battling with what they had seen. Dr. Anderson sat in a corner of Sarah's room, repeatedly reviewing her charts, searching for a medical explanation that didn't exist. Emily Miller held her daughter's hand, noticing subtle changes in Sarah that went beyond physical healing. The child's eyes held a new depth, as if they had witnessed things beyond mortal understanding. When Sarah spoke, her voice carried an otherworldly quality that made even the most skeptical listeners pause. "Mom," she said softly, "Daddy wanted me to tell you he didn't fall asleep at the wheel that night." The room fell silent. Detective Sullivan, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, straightened up. James Thompson, passing by the room at that exact moment, stumbled mid-stride. Father Parker, who had been offering quiet prayers of thanksgiving, looked up sharply, his aged face paling at Sarah's words. Sarah described her journey with the clarity of someone recounting a trip to the grocery store. She spoke of a light that didn't hurt her eyes, of music that felt more than sounded, and of her father's embrace warm and real as any earthly touch. But it was her description of God's throne that captivated everyone within earshot. It wasn't just a chair, she explained. It was like love had taken shape, and when he spoke, every word felt like a hug and a warning at the same time. Dr. Anderson documented everything, his medical training compelling him to record this phenomenon even as it defied all scientific explanation. Sarah's brain scans showed unusual activity patterns, her blood work revealed inexplicable changes, and most remarkably, the severe injuries from the accident had vanished without a trace. The only physical evidence of her experience was a slight glow that seemed to emanate from within, not visible to electronic devices but undeniable to human eyes. Victoria Reynolds watched from outside the room, her administrative concerns forgotten as she grappled with what she was witnessing. The hospital's legal team was already calling emergency meetings, but something about Sarah's peaceful presence made their concerns seem trivial. The child's every word seemed to carry weight, as if each syllable was laden with purpose. The first indication that this was more than a simple miracle came when Sarah turned to Jessica White, who had managed to blend in with the medical staff. "The papers in the blue folder," Sarah said, though no one had introduced the journalist. "They're important." "Daddy says look behind the water damage." Jessica's hand instinctively went to her bag, where a water damage folder of Robert Miller's case had sat untouched for 3 years. As the day progressed, more inexplicable things occurred around Sarah. Electronics would fluctuate in her presence, and the room's temperature would drop whenever she spoke of her heavenly experience. But most remarkable was the small, steady flame that seemed to dance in her eyes when she delivered God's warning: the darkness isn't just in hearts anymore. It's in buildings and banks, in signatures and silence. But light always finds a way through the cracks. Local news vans began gathering outside the hospital, drawn by whispered rumors of a miracle. Social media exploded with speculation, and Portland Miracle started trending. But inside room 414, Sarah remained eerily calm, as if waiting for something or someone to make the next move in a divine chess game. Dr. Anderson, completing his 36th straight hour on duty, finally sat down to write his official report. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he struggled to find words that would neither compromise his medical integrity nor deny the inexplicable truth he had witnessed. Before he could type a single word, Sarah called him over. "Sometimes," she said, looking into his tired eyes, "the best medicine is truth." The Portland Tribune ran its first headline with careful skepticism. Miraculous recovery raises questions at Portland General. Mainstream media outlets initially approached the story with reserved cynicism, focusing on the medical anomaly rather than the spiritual implications. But social media told a different story, as hundreds of witnesses from the hospital shared their experiences, and Portland Miracle continued climbing trending lists. Senator Thompson's office issued a brief statement expressing sympathy for the Miller family, while carefully avoiding any mention of his son's involvement in the accident. Behind closed doors, the senator's team worked frantically to contain the situation, particularly concerned about Sarah's cryptic references to her father's death. James Thompson, meanwhile, had checked himself into a private rehabilitation facility, citing exhaustion and stress. The medical community descended upon Portland General like a swarm. Specialists from around the country requested access to Sarah's medical records, each eager to be the first to provide a scientific explanation. Dr. Anderson found himself thrust into the spotlight, his decision to violate hospital policy now scrutinized by medical ethics boards. Yet, when interviewed, he maintained a simple response: sometimes we must choose between policy and humanity. Religious leaders offered varying interpretations. Some proclaimed it a genuine miracle, while others suggested mass hysteria or medical misconception. Father Parker found himself mediating between increasingly heated debates in his parish. Faith, he reminded his congregation, is personal, but truth is universal. His words were picked up by national news networks, adding fuel to the growing discourse. Victoria Reynolds faced mounting pressure from the hospital board. The incident had exposed their controversial insurance policies, leading to public outrage and calls for reform. Anonymous donors began offering to cover emergency care for uninsured patients inspired by Sarah's case. Reynolds watched as the system she'd helped build started crumbling under the weight of compassion. Detective Sullivan's request to reopen Robert Miller's case met with unusual resistance from his superiors. Yet, each time pressure mounted to drop the investigation, another piece of evidence mysteriously appeared on his desk. Anonymous tips, forgotten witnesses, and misplaced reports suddenly surfaced, forming a trail that all led back to the night of Robert's accident. Jessica White's initial article about Sarah's experience gained unprecedented online traction. Her inbox flooded with messages from people claiming similar near-death experiences, each sharing stories of divine encounters. But it was an email from a former City Hall clerk that caught her attention, a cryptic message about building permits and missing audit reports from 3 years ago. The scientific community split into factions. Neural specialists suggested temporal lobe anomalies, while quantum physicists proposed theories about consciousness and parallel dimensions. Yet none could explain the continued phenomena around Sarah: the unexplained lights, the temperature fluctuations, and the eerily accurate knowledge of strangers' secrets. Public opinion polarized the city. Believers camped outside the hospital holding candlelight vigils and prayer circles. Skeptics demanded investigations into possible fraud or manipulation. Local talk shows fielded heated debates about religion, science, and the nature of truth. Through it all, Sarah remained remarkably composed, as if watching a play whose ending she already knew. Emily Miller found herself caught in the crossfire of public attention. Some praised her faith and devotion, while others suggested she had orchestrated an elaborate hoax. The bookstore where she worked became both a pilgrimage site and a target for skeptics. Yet, she maintained a quiet dignity, telling reporters only, "Truth doesn't need defenders, it just needs time." In the quiet of her hospital room, with Emily holding her hand and Father Parker recording her words, Sarah began sharing her journey through heaven. Her voice took on a melodic quality, as if the very act of remembering brought echoes of celestial music. The sophisticated vocabulary and profound insights flowing from her 9-year-old lips left the adults in the room spellbound. It wasn't like walking, Sarah explained, her eyes focused on something distant. It was like being everywhere and nowhere at once. The colors weren't just things you saw, they were feelings you could touch. Gold wasn't just gold, it was like touching pure joy. Blue wasn't just blue, it was like swimming in peace itself. As she spoke, the room's monitors flickered in harmony with her words, and the temperature ebbed and flowed like gentle waves. Her reunion with Robert Miller formed the heart of her narrative. Daddy was exactly as I remembered, but also more like all the love he ever felt for us was now visible, glowing around him like a warm light. She described how he showed her moments from his life, his work as a state auditor, the documents he discovered, the choice he faced, and the fateful night he chose integrity over silence. He didn't fall asleep driving, Sarah said firmly. He chose to stay awake to truth. The throne room of God, as Sarah described it, defied earthly architecture. It wasn't built, she explained, it was loved into being. Every stone was pure light, but not bright enough to hurt. The floor wasn't below us, it was like standing on living joy. Her description of God himself made Father Parker weep. He was everything all at once, every parent's love, every friend's laugh, every sunrise, every act of kindness, all in one presence. When he smiled, entire galaxies danced. But it was God's warning that brought a solemn weight to her voice. He showed me two futures, Sarah continued. In one, darkness grew like ivy on buildings, wrapping around people's hearts until they forgot how to love. Money became more important than mercy, and lies grew so thick they looked like truth. Her voice trembled as she described streets filled with shadows, offices where corruption bred like poison, and churches empty of real faith. The second future she described glowed in her words. It started with small lights, one person choosing truth over profit, another choosing kindness over convenience. Each tiny light joined others until whole cities shone. She spoke of communities transformed by compassion, of justice flowing like clean water, of truth breaking chains of corruption. Then came the most extraordinary part of her testimony. God gave me a candle, Sarah said, her hand moving as if holding an invisible flame. But it wasn't just any candle. It was made from every tear my mom cried, every prayer Father Parker whispered, every moment Dr. Anderson chose healing over rules, every truth my daddy died protecting. As she spoke these words, witnesses would later swear they saw a gentle flame dancing in the reflection of her eyes. The divine message she carried came with specific instructions. The light has to spread, she explained. Not just in churches or prayers, but in courtrooms and offices, in hospital policies and police reports. God said the darkness isn't just spiritual anymore, it's hiding in paperwork and bank accounts, in deleted emails and midnight meetings. Each revelation seemed to carry a weight beyond her years, yet she delivered them with unwavering certainty. Sarah's account of her heavenly journey included encounters with others who had crossed the threshold between worlds. They showed me their stories, she said, like living books written in light. Some had died protecting truth, others saving lives, all of them choosing light over darkness. She described a great cloud of witnesses, all watching and waiting for humanity's response to divine justice. The most profound moment came when she described God's perspective on human suffering. He cries with us, Sarah said, tears rolling down her cheeks. Every time someone chooses money over mercy, power over truth, he feels it like a parent feels their child's pain. But he also celebrates every time someone stands up for what's right, no matter how small it seems. As she concluded her account, Sarah shared the most personal detail of all her choice to return. I wanted to stay, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Everything there was perfect, but God showed me how my story could help break the chains of darkness here. He said sometimes the greatest light comes from the smallest candle. The medical equipment in her room surged briefly as she finished speaking, as if confirming her otherworldly experience. The aftermath of Sarah's heavenly revelation sent shockwaves through Portland's power structure. Senator Thompson's office launched a sophisticated media campaign to discredit the Millers, hiring crisis management experts who specialized in manipulating public opinion. Anonymous articles began appearing online, suggesting Emily Miller had a history of mental instability and questioning her fitness as a mother. The pressure on Emily intensified when her employer, under subtle threats from powerful business interests, terminated her position, citing restructuring. Overnight, the single mother found herself not only unemployed but seemingly unemployable, as potential employers received mysterious calls warning against hiring her. The financial strain began to show, yet Emily's faith remained unshaken. God doesn't promise an easy path. She told Sarah one evening, He promises to walk it with us. Dr. Anderson faced his own battles within the hospital administration. Victoria Reynolds, caught between mounting public support for his actions and pressure from the board, placed him on administrative review. His colleagues, initially supportive, began distancing themselves as rumors spread about potential medical license investigations. Yet each time the pressure peaked, another patient would come forward with stories of his past compassion, creating a groundswell of public support that made direct action against him politically difficult. Jessica White's investigation into Robert Miller's death gained unexpected momentum when a retired clerk contacted her with copies of audit documents supposedly destroyed years ago. The documents revealed a complex web of fraudulent building contracts and misappropriated funds, all leading back to projects approved under Senator Thompson's oversight. However, before the clerk could provide additional evidence, they disappeared, leaving behind only a cryptic note about choosing light over darkness. Father Parker found himself wrestling with his pastoral obligations and the weight of Robert Miller's final confession. The elderly priest began receiving late-night phone calls suggesting his retirement might be in everyone's best interest. His sermons, once focused on general spiritual matters, increasingly addressed themes of moral courage and divine justice, drawing both praise and concern from his superiors. Detective Sullivan's investigation met with escalating resistance. Case files vanished from secure storage, witnesses suddenly developed memory problems, and his supervisor strongly suggested he consider early retirement. Yet each obstacle seemed to come with an unexpected breakthrough, an anonymous tip, a misplaced document mysteriously reappearing, or a witness finding the courage to speak truth. The hospital became a battleground of competing interests. While Victoria Reynolds struggled to maintain control, staff members began quietly defying policies that prioritized profit over patient care. Inspired by Dr. Anderson's example and Sarah's message, a movement of compassionate care spread through the hospital like a quiet revolution. Emergency room staff started accidentally, treating patients before checking insurance status, while administrators found creative ways to classify charity cases. James Thompson, watching events unfold from his rehabilitation facility, fought his own battles with conscience and addiction. His nights were haunted by memories of two accidents, one that killed Robert Miller and another that nearly took Sarah's life. His father's daily phone calls, once filled with political strategies and expectations, now carried an edge of desperate concern. The young lawyer began keeping a detailed journal, its pages filled with truths he wasn't yet brave enough to speak aloud. Sarah's continued presence in the hospital defied medical explanation. Though physically healed, she exhibited phenomena that attracted both scientific researchers and religious pilgrims. Security cameras near her room captured unexplained lights, while visitors reported experiencing visions of their own past moral choices. The child's unwavering serenity amid the growing chaos only added to the tension, as if she was merely waiting for all the pieces to align. Local media found themselves caught between truth and influence. While some reporters pursued the growing evidence of corruption, others yielded to pressure from advertisers and political interests. The Portland Tribune's editor faced declining advertising revenue as powerful businesses expressed their concern about the paper's investigative direction. Yet Jessica White's articles continued to draw national attention, protected by a growing public demand for truth. As tensions mounted, Sarah's prophetic warning about darkness hiding in buildings and bank accounts began to resonate with unsettling clarity. Each attempt to suppress the truth seemed to validate her divine message, while every act of courage, no matter how small, added to the growing light she had described. The battle lines were drawn not between believers and skeptics, but between those who chose truth and those who clung to shadows. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday morning when James Thompson walked into the Portland Tribune's offices, clutching a leather briefcase filled with 3 years of carefully preserved evidence. His hands trembled, but his voice remained steady as he faced Jessica White. "My father didn't just cover up 2 accidents," he said, placing a USB drive on her desk. "He buried an entire system of corruption that Robert Miller discovered." The evidence was devastating in its thoroughness. Robert Miller, as a state auditor, had uncovered a complex network of fraudulent construction contracts, money laundering through charitable foundations, and kickbacks disguised as political contributions. The paper trail led to prominent business leaders, judges, and politicians, all connected to Senator Thompson's infrastructure projects. The most damning revelation concerned Robert Miller's death. Security camera footage, supposedly lost in a system malfunction, showed a black SUV forcing Miller's car off the road. James, battling tears, confessed his role. "I was driving, but my father arranged it. He said we were just going to scare him into silence. I've been drowning in alcohol ever since, trying to forget his face in the rearview mirror. Detective Sullivan's phone began ringing nonstop as long silent witnesses suddenly found their courage. A former city clerk revealed how she'd been forced to falsify documents. A construction foreman detailed how safety violations were hidden. Each testimony added another piece to the puzzle Robert Miller had died trying to expose. Victoria Reynolds made her own choice. Entering Sarah's hospital room, she placed a thick folder on the bed. "Your father tried to warn me about the hospital's billing fraud," she told the child. "I chose my career over truth. But your light showed me that darkness eventually consumes those who embrace it." The folder contained years of documented cases where patients were denied care or overcharged, along with emails proving systematic discrimination against the uninsured. The dam broke. Jessica White's explosive article, published simultaneously in the Portland Tribune and several national newspapers, sent shockwaves through the city's power structure. The detailed evidence, collaborated by multiple sources and supported by irrefutable documentation, left no room for denial or spin. Senator Thompson's initial attempts at damage control crumbled when his own staff began coming forward. His personal assistant revealed recordings of phone calls ordering evidence destruction. His financial advisor provided documents showing patterns of bribe payments disguised as consulting fees. The carefully constructed facade of respectability collapsed like a house of cards. Dr. Anderson's medical board hearing transformed into a public testimony about healthcare inequality. Supported by Victoria Reynolds' evidence, he spoke not just about Sarah's miracle, but about countless other patients who had suffered under profit-driven policies. The board's chamber overflowed with people sharing stories of denied care and lost loved ones, their voices forming a chorus of long-suppressed truth. Father Parker finally broke his silence about Robert Miller's last confession. With the seal of confidentiality lifted by James Thompson's public admission, the priest shared how Robert had sought guidance about exposing the corruption. He knew the risks, Father Parker testified, but he said his daughter deserved to grow up in a world where truth mattered more than power. The most powerful moment came when Sarah, still radiating her unexplainable serenity, testified before a hastily convened grand jury. As she described her heavenly encounter in her father's message, the courthouse lights flickered and dimmed, while her own presence seemed to glow with an inner light. "Daddy didn't die in an accident," she said simply. "He died choosing light over darkness, and now we all have the same choice." Portland's transformation began like a ripple effect from Sarah's hospital room. The exposure of corruption triggered not just legal changes, but a profound shift in community consciousness. Citizens who had long accepted that's just how things work began questioning, challenging, and most importantly, acting to create change. The hospital became the epicenter of reform. Victoria Reynolds, rather than resigning in disgrace, worked with Dr. Anderson to completely restructure the hospital's policies. They established the Miller Protocol, ensuring that emergency care would never again be denied based on insurance status. Anonymous donors, inspired by the changes, created a foundation to cover medical costs for uninsured patients, naming it Sarah's Light. Local businesses, seeking to distance themselves from the corruption scandal, launched transparency initiatives. Construction companies voluntarily opened their books for public audit. Banks established new protocols for flagging suspicious political donations. Law firms started pro bono divisions specifically focused on exposing corporate fraud. The darkness Sarah had described was being met with institutional light. In churches across Portland, Father Parker's sermons about moral courage sparked a movement. Religious leaders from different faiths came together, forming an interfaith coalition against corruption. They established support networks for whistleblowers and their families, providing both spiritual and practical assistance to those who chose truth over security. James Thompson's public confession and subsequent dedication to making amends became a powerful symbol of redemption. After completing rehabilitation, he established a legal aid foundation using his inheritance, specifically helping victims of corporate fraud and medical negligence. His father's former associates watched in dismay as their one-time heir apparent became their most effective adversary. Detective Sullivan found himself leading a newly empowered anti-corruption unit, staffed by young officers inspired by Robert Miller's sacrifice. Tips about corruption, once ignored, now received thorough investigation. The police department's transformation became a model for other cities, proving that law enforcement could prioritize justice over political pressure. The Portland Tribune, under Jessica White's influence, established a dedicated investigative unit focused on corporate and political transparency. Other media outlets, seeing the public's hunger for truth, began shifting away from sensationalism towards substantive investigative reporting. The paper's subscription rates soared as citizens recognized the value of honest journalism. Emily Miller watched this transformation from her new position as community liaison for the hospital's patient advocacy program. Her experience as both a victim of corruption and a symbol of resilient faith made her uniquely qualified to help others navigate similar challenges. The bookstore that had fired her now displayed a plaque honoring Robert Miller's courage. But perhaps the most profound changes happened in countless small, personal ways. Neighbors began helping neighbors, creating support networks for families facing medical crises. Business owners prioritized ethical practices over profit margins. City employees found the courage to question suspicious patterns. Each small act of integrity added to the growing light Sarah had described in her vision. The city's transformation attracted national attention. Documentary filmmakers, journalists, and researchers came to study what became known as the Portland Awakening. While some focused on the supernatural elements of Sarah's experience, others documented the very tangible ways a community could choose light over darkness, truth over power, and compassion over profit. As this story touches hearts and awakens souls, we invite you to be part of our growing community of truth seekers. By subscribing to our channel, you help spread these powerful messages of faith, miracles, and justice. Together, we can illuminate the path for others seeking light in darkness. The price of truth began to manifest in unexpected ways for those closest to Sarah's miracle. Dr. Michael Anderson, despite his vindication in the media, faced relentless scrutiny from medical boards and insurance companies. His decision to treat Sarah had sparked a national debate about medical ethics, but it also marked him as a troublemaker in the eyes of many hospital administrators. Job offers mysteriously dried up, and his pioneering research proposals were consistently rejected without review. Emily Miller's challenges went beyond mere financial hardship. Death threats began arriving at their new apartment, some containing detailed information about Sarah's daily routine. The police provided protection, but the constant stress took its toll. Emily lost weight, her hands developed a constant tremor, and sleep became an elusive luxury. Yet each morning she found the strength to smile for Sarah, her faith becoming both shield and sustenance. Father Parker's age finally caught up with him as the strain of recent events took their toll. A minor stroke left him struggling with speech, though his mind remained sharp. His homilies became shorter but paradoxically more powerful, as each hard-won word carried the weight of lived truth. The diocesan authorities, concerned about his health and his increasingly direct challenges to institutional corruption, began suggesting a younger replacement. Sarah herself bore an invisible burden. The constant phenomena around her, inexplicable lights, temperature changes, and moments of prescient knowledge attracted an endless stream of researchers, skeptics, and religious seekers. Some nights she would wake up crying, overwhelmed by the weight of knowledge no child should have to bear. The divine candle she spoke of seemed to burn within her, consuming her even as it illuminated others. Jessica White's pursuit of truth came with professional isolation. Former colleagues avoided her, sources clammed up on unrelated stories, and her car was vandalized 3 times in 2 weeks. The Tribune stood by her, but advertising revenue plummeted as powerful businesses withdrew their support. She began sleeping in her office, surrounded by files and takeout containers, her personal life sacrificed on the altar of investigative integrity. Detective Sullivan discovered that choosing light meant walking in shadow. His fellow officers, uncertain where the next revelation might lead, treated him with careful distance. His wife, worried about his safety, took their children to stay with relatives after a brake line mysteriously failed. Each new piece of evidence he uncovered seemed to come with a personal price tag attached. Victoria Reynolds, despite her eventual role in exposing the truth, faced her own purgatory. Former friends and colleagues shunned her, seeing her as a traitor to her class. Her children's private schools suddenly discovered enrollment issues. Her husband's law firm made it clear that his partnership track had been indefinitely delayed. The comfortable life she had built over decades crumbled in a matter of weeks. The physical and emotional toll on these individuals became a testimony to the cost of choosing light over darkness. They formed an informal support group, meeting weekly in the hospital chapel where it had all begun. There, they shared their struggles, their fears, and their unwavering commitment to the truth that had disrupted their lives so completely. The societal fractures from Sarah's miracle and the subsequent exposures ran deep through Portland's community. Neighborhoods became divided between those who supported the whistleblowers and those who feared the economic impact of exposed corruption. Long-standing friendships ended over dinner table arguments about truth versus stability. Churches split as congregations grappled with the implications of divine intervention in modern corruption. The city's business community experienced unprecedented upheaval. Companies associated with Senator Thompson's projects faced boycotts and protests, while their employees struggled with mortgage payments and children's tuition. Small businesses had to choose sides, knowing either choice could alienate half their customers. The Chamber of Commerce meetings became battlegrounds between old guard defenders of business as usual and reformers demanding transparency. Portland's medical community splintered into factions. Some hospitals rushed to adopt versions of the Miller Protocol, while others doubled down on strict insurance requirements. Medical students began choosing residency programs based on ethical stances rather than prestige. Doctors found themselves caught between professional advancement and moral conviction, with career paths increasingly defined by these choices. The legal system showed signs of strain as judges recused themselves from cases involving exposed corruption, fearing their own past associations might be questioned. The public defender's office was flooded with whistleblower cases, while corporate law firms hemorrhaged clients and partners. Young lawyers, inspired by James Thompson's transformation, began rejecting lucrative offers from firms with questionable ethics. Local media outlets faced their own crisis of conscience. Reporters who had spent years cultivating political sources found themselves choosing between access and accuracy. Some newspapers lost advertising revenue but gained subscribers through honest reporting, while others maintained profits by avoiding controversial stories. The definition of journalistic integrity was being rewritten in real time. Education felt the tremors as well. Universities that had accepted donations from implicated businesses faced student protests demanding the return of tainted money. Public schools struggled to teach about current events when parents disagreed about the nature of truth itself. Teachers who discussed the Miller case found themselves called before angry school boards. The political landscape shifted like quicksand. Career politicians who had navigated corrupt systems for decades suddenly found their usual methods exposed to uncomfortable light. Voter registration surged as citizens realized the importance of local elections. Campaign contributions came under intense scrutiny, making traditional fundraising almost impossible. Even Portland's famous food scene wasn't immune. Restaurants that had thrived on business meetings and political fundraisers saw reservations plummet as customers avoided any hint of impropriety. Food critics began including ethical sourcing and labor practices in their reviews. The simple act of choosing where to eat dinner became a political statement. The social fabric of the city seemed to be unraveling and reweaving itself simultaneously. While some mourned the loss of comfortable certainties, others celebrated the birth of a more conscious community. The transformation came with real pain, yet also carried the promise of renewal that Sarah had described in her vision. The full truth about Robert Miller's death emerged in layers, like an archaeological dig into corruption. During a quiet evening in Sarah's hospital room, she began sharing details about her heavenly conversation with her father that filled crucial gaps in the investigation. The revelation came not in dramatic bursts, but in the soft, certain voice of a child who had touched eternity. Robert Miller, Sarah revealed, had discovered the corruption during a routine audit of city construction projects. The numbers didn't align with the materials used, and safety inspections had been falsified on multiple buildings, including schools and hospitals. But it wasn't just about money. The compromised structures put thousands of lives at risk. Her father had agonized over the decision to come forward, knowing the power of those involved. "Daddy showed me everything in heaven," Sarah explained, her eyes reflecting an otherworldly light. "He found a pattern in the contracts. Each project had two sets of books, one for the public, one for the people who were stealing. But the real problem was the buildings. They weren't safe. They used weak materials and pocketed the difference. As she spoke, Detective Sullivan frantically cross-referenced her words with newly uncovered documents. The night of his death took on new clarity through Sarah's account. Robert had been preparing to present his findings to a federal investigation team. He had compiled evidence in a secure cloud server, with access codes hidden in a series of apparently innocent family photos. The accident was orchestrated after surveillance revealed his planned meeting with federal authorities. James Thompson's earlier confession gained deeper context as Sarah described what her father had shown her in heaven. "Daddy forgave Mr. James," she said. "He saw how Senator Thompson used his own son, making him think the brake lines were just going to be damaged a little. But they were cut completely. They wanted Daddy to die." The engineering reports from the accident scene, recently re-examined, confirmed this detail that had never been made public. Most haunting were the details of Robert's final moments. Daddy knew what was happening when he saw the SUV Sarah shared, tears rolling down her cheeks. He could have swerved the other way and maybe lived, but that would have hit a bus stop full of people. He chose to protect them instead. Traffic camera footage, long thought destroyed but recently recovered, verified this crucial detail. Through Sarah's revelations, Robert Miller emerged not just as a whistleblower, but as a man who had carried the burden of his knowledge with remarkable grace. He had continued attending church, coaching Sarah's soccer team, and living a normal life while gathering evidence that would expose systemic corruption. His final act of sacrifice, choosing to protect strangers at the cost of his own life, exemplified the values he had lived by. The secure server Robert had prepared was finally located, its contents protected by the family photos Sarah described from her heavenly conversation. Each file was meticulously documented, showing years of patient investigation. He had created a complete map of the corruption network, understanding that his death might be necessary to bring it to light. "Daddy said the truth doesn't die with the truth-teller," Sarah concluded, her voice carrying an authority beyond her years. "He said sometimes a seed has to be buried before light can grow." Her words would later be engraved on the Whistleblower Protection Monument erected outside the courthouse beneath Robert Miller's name. The wheels of justice began turning with unprecedented speed once Robert Miller's complete evidence came to light. Senator Thompson was arrested during a televised press conference, his face ashen as federal agents led him past the cameras he had once commanded so confidently. The investigation expanded like a spiderweb, each strand leading to new revelations of corruption and complicity. James Thompson's testimony became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Speaking with a clarity born of sobriety and redemption, he detailed decades of corruption orchestrated by his father. His testimony implicated dozens of officials, business leaders, and supposed pillars of the community. The courtroom fell silent as he described his father's calculated use of his own son's alcoholism to create a perfect scapegoat for Robert Miller's murder. The federal investigation team discovered that Robert Miller's findings went far beyond Portland. The corrupted construction contracts were part of a national network of fraud that had compromised infrastructure projects across multiple states. Buildings were evacuated, emergency inspections ordered, and dozens of previously ignored whistleblower reports suddenly gained new credibility. Victoria Reynolds' testimony about healthcare fraud opened another front in the justice system's response. Her detailed documentation led to nationwide investigations of hospital billing practices and insurance policies. The Miller Protocol became federal legislation, ensuring emergency medical care regardless of insurance status. Healthcare executives found themselves facing both criminal charges and civil lawsuits. Detective Sullivan's persistence was vindicated as cold cases connected to the corruption network were reopened. Other mysterious accidents and suicides were re-examined, revealing a pattern of silenced whistleblowers stretching back decades. Families who had long suspected foul play finally received answers, and in many cases compensation from seized assets. The justice system itself underwent reform as the extent of judicial compromise was revealed. Judges who had accepted bribes or ruled favorably for Senator Thompson's interests were disbarred and prosecuted. A new oversight committee, including civilian members, was established to monitor judicial integrity. The legal community embraced transparency measures that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Sarah's testimony before the grand jury became legendary in legal circles. As she described her heavenly encounter with her father and the evidence he showed her, the courtroom experienced inexplicable phenomena: lights flickering, temperatures dropping, and a tangible sense of divine presence that even hardened skeptics found difficult to dismiss. Her account matched sealed evidence with impossible accuracy. The seized assets from corrupted projects and officials formed the basis of a victim compensation fund. Families who had lost loved ones to compromised infrastructure or denied medical care received both justice and restitution. Robert Miller's meticulous documentation ensured that even victims unaware of their victimization could be identified and compensated. Father Parker lived long enough to see justice served, though his health continued to decline. His final sermon, delivered from a wheelchair, spoke of divine timing and the cost of truth. Sometimes, he said, his voice weak but unwavering, God's justice arrives like a summer storm, slow to gather but unstoppable once it breaks. He passed away peacefully the following Sunday, his last words being, "The light wins." The resolution of Portland's transformation came not with a bang but with a series of quiet victories that rippled through the community. Sarah Miller, now 10 years old, returned home from the hospital on a bright spring morning. The phenomena that had surrounded her gradually subsided, though the light in her eyes remained something more than merely human. Emily Miller found herself leading a newly established whistleblower support foundation funded by recovered corruption money. The foundation, named Robert's Light, provided both practical and emotional support to those choosing truth over security. Their modest apartment above the bookstore became a beacon of hope for others facing similar choices, with Emily's gentle strength offering guidance through difficult decisions. Dr. Anderson's vindication came in the form of a revolutionary change in medical practice. The American Medical Association adopted his ethical framework as a national standard, making patient care priority over profit, the law rather than the exception. He declined lucrative offers from prestigious hospitals, choosing instead to continue serving at Portland General, where every decision still reflected the lessons learned during Sarah's miracle. James Thompson found his redemption in service. Rather than rebuilding his legal career, he established a recovery program for corporate whistleblowers, combining addiction treatment with legal protection. His father's conviction and life sentence became final, but James's weekly prison visits focused on forgiveness and understanding rather than recrimination. Jessica White's investigative reporting earned a Pulitzer Prize, but she considered her real reward to be the transformation in local journalism. The Portland Tribune became a national model for investigative reporting, demonstrating that truth-focused journalism could be both ethically sound and financially viable. Her team of young reporters approached each story with the same dedication to truth that had characterized Robert Miller's work. Victoria Reynolds, rather than retiring in disgrace, channeled her administrative expertise into creating transparency protocols for healthcare institutions. Her insider knowledge of how corruption operated made her uniquely qualified to prevent it. The systems she designed were adopted by hospitals nationwide, ensuring that profit would never again overshadow patient care. Detective Sullivan's anti-corruption unit became a model for law enforcement agencies across the country. His team's methodology for investigating corporate crime was incorporated into FBI training programs, while his personal integrity set a new standard for police leadership. The Sullivan protocols became synonymous with thorough, uncompromising investigation of white-collar crime. The final chapter of Portland's transformation unfolded on the first anniversary of Sarah's miracle. A gathering at St. Michael's Church brought together all those whose lives had been touched by the events of the past year. Sarah stood at the pulpit, her father's silver cross gleaming against her dress, and shared a message that brought the entire story full circle. "The candle God gave me wasn't just for seeing truth," she explained, her young voice carrying the weight of divine wisdom. It was for lighting other candles. As she spoke, the church's lights dimmed inexplicably, while a soft glow emanated from her presence. Every time someone chooses truth over lies, kindness over profit, or courage over comfort, their candle lights up too. Emily Miller, standing beside her daughter, shared her own revelation. "We think miracles have to be big, like coming back from death," she said. "But sometimes the biggest miracle is just choosing to do what's right when it would be easier not to." Her words resonated through the church, touching hearts that had been transformed by the year's events. Dr. Anderson spoke of healing that went beyond the physical. Medicine can fix bodies, he reflected, but truth heals souls. His new medical ethics curriculum, already adopted by major universities, emphasized the integration of compassion with clinical care. The phenomena that had surrounded Sarah's recovery had challenged scientific understanding, but the principles of compassionate care she inspired were transforming medical practice. James Thompson's testimony brought many to tears. "My father built an empire on darkness," he acknowledged, "but Sarah showed me that redemption begins with a single step toward light." His rehabilitation program had already helped dozens of corporate whistleblowers find their courage, proving that even those deep in shadow could choose a different path. The memorial plaque for Robert Miller was unveiled outside the church, bearing words from Sarah's heavenly vision: "Truth buried in love always grows into light." The ceremony included the announcement of annual ethics awards in his name, recognizing individuals who demonstrated moral courage in challenging circumstances. As the gathering concluded, Sarah shared one final message from her heavenly experience. "God doesn't ask us to be perfect," she said, the glow around her intensifying. "He just asks us to keep choosing light, one small decision at a time." The church bells began ringing spontaneously, and witnesses would later swear they saw a light pass from person to person to person through the congregation. The story of Portland's transformation spread far beyond the city limits, inspiring similar movements across the country. But its most profound impact remained personal. Countless individual decisions to choose truth over convenience, compassion over profit, and light over darkness. Sarah's candle had indeed lit others, creating a network of illuminated hearts that continued to grow. Emily and Sarah still lived above the bookstore, their simple life a testimony to the power of faith and truth. Each evening they would light a candle in their window, a reminder of both what was lost and what was gained. And on quiet nights, visitors to St. Michael's would sometimes see an inexplicable light in the church windows, as if heaven itself was confirming that no act of truth, however small, goes unnoticed. As this powerful story of faith, miracles, and justice touches your heart, we invite you to join our community of truth seekers. Your subscription helps us continue sharing these inspiring messages. Please take a moment to like this video and share it with loved ones who might need its light. Leave a comment about how this story resonated with you. Did it change your perspective on faith and justice? Would you like to hear part 2, where we explore what happened after the events in Portland began inspiring similar movements across the nation? Your support makes these stories possible.